United Nations Committee spent months in Palestine traveling over the disputed areas and conferring with Arabs and Jews. The majority of the committee members recommended that Palestine be partitioned into an Arab state and a Jewish state, and under international control, the city of Jerusalem, the three to be linked by economic union. The General Assembly accepted this recommendation. But the United Nations job was not yet done. Border clashes increased, and soon open warfare broke out in this troubled area of the world. The United Nations continued its efforts for peace, and the General Assembly appointed Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden as special mediator, and he was charged with negotiating a settlement of the situation in Palestine. Count Bernadotte devoted himself to meetings with the Arabs and the Jews, and was finally successful in arranging a truce. While striving for a basis for permanent peace in Palestine, Count Bernadotte was assassinated by terrorists in Jerusalem. The world mourned the first United Nations casualty in the struggle for world peace. The truce arranged by Count Bernadotte was broken, and violence again spread throughout the disputed areas of Palestine. Dr. Ralph J. Bunche of the United States was appointed acting mediator and continued the efforts of Count Bernadotte to find a solution. Through Dr. Bunche's negotiations as mediator, final treaties were signed and peace came to the troubled Holy Land. The State of Israel had been proclaimed, and the people rejoiced in their new nation, a haven of refuge for the displaced and persecuted members of the Jewish faith from all over the world. Israel was admitted to membership in the United Nations, and her flag was raised at Lake Success. Again, the United Nations had, through peaceful mediation, resolved an international dispute which had been a threat to world peace. The problem of Korea also seemed ideally suited to peaceful settlement under United Nations auspices. In September 1947, the United States submitted the question of Korean independence to the General Assembly. A United Nations commission was appointed to forward the establishment of a free, democratic government of Korea through nationwide elections. The Soviet, previously pledged to Korean independence, now refused to participate in the work of this commission. This policy of obstruction was not new. In Seoul, capital of Korea, the 2 previous years had seen fruitless meetings between the Soviet and United States military commanders. Soviet obstruction had resulted in the permanent and tragic division of the Korean people at the 38th parallel, which had been originally established only as a temporary boundary for administrative purposes. The chief task of the newly created United Nations Commission was to obtain cooperation from the Soviet authorities in establishing a united, independent Republic of Korea. This task was made impossible by Soviet refusal to allow the Commission to cross the 38th parallel, and Soviet refusal to cooperate in any way. Only in South Korea were free elections under the impartial supervision of the Commission possible. Here, true to its pledges, the United Nations assisted in the creation of an independent nation based on the freely expressed will of the people. Soviet obstruction had prevented the participation of all Koreans in a unified republic, but a republic there was. The newly elected government continued the work of the United States military government, which had voluntarily resigned its powers to the new nation. Land reform, education, public safety, and many other projects were now the concern of the new government. The people of the Republic of Korea settled down to the pursuits of peace. Suddenly and without warning, the communist-controlled North Koreans hurled themselves upon their peaceful neighbors to the south, and in an act of stark and unprovoked aggression, attempted the destruction of the Republic. the peaceful citizens of the Republic of Korea, torn from their homes, separated from their families, formed the long and miserable lines of refugees, which are always the first fruit of ruthless conquest. The United Nations Security Council met in emergency session at Lake Success to take action on the North Korean aggression. The Soviet Union chose to be absent. The Council quickly dispatched a ceasefire order to the North Korean regime. This order was ignored. The Council then voted for United Nations military action against the invaders. General Douglas MacArthur was named Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations forces in Korea. And after visiting the battlefront, he accepted the first United Nations battle flag to be flown by the United Nations forces fighting the communist invaders. For 5 weeks, as Korean Republican and United States forces under the United Nations flag fought to stem the tide of North Korean communist aggression, while the Security Council took all emergency steps in an effort to halt that aggression, the delegate of the Soviet Union pointedly absented himself from the United Nations deliberations and decisions. Improvising the defense of the Republic of Korea, and with the heroic help of the Republican fighting forces, the United Nations troops fought and fell back, trading space for time until more help could arrive. On August 1st, Soviet delegate Jacob Malik, for the first time since the invasion, returned to take his seat in the Security Council. It was the turn of the Soviet to preside. Malik, deliberately ignoring the North Korean communist aggression, began a systematic campaign as president to block any action on the Korean War by the Security Council. Meanwhile, the United Nations troops battled the Soviet-armed communist invaders, and the Security Council tried without success to prod the Soviet delegate to his responsibilities. As August Day followed August Day, the United Nations continued its fight in Korea. In the Security Council, the Soviet delegate sat impassive, rendering impotent the Council's efforts to end the bloodshed in Korea. As August waned, United States Delegate Warren Austin, in righteous wrath, but in simple terms, made clear for all the world to see the sinister actions of the enemies of democracy.
Whose troops are attacking deep in somebody else's territory? The North Koreans. Whose territory is overrun by an invading army? The Republic of Korea's. Who is assisting the Republic of Korea to defend itself? The United Nations, with the support of 53 of the 59 members. Who has the influence and the power to call off the invading North Korean army? The Soviet Union. Who is responsible for the bombing and bloodshed that inevitably ensued from the fact of aggression? The North Koreans and those who support them. Who then can stop the bombing and the bloodshed? The North Koreans and those who support their aggression. What member of the Security Council is supporting the North Korean regime in the Security Council? The Soviet Union. Who then is supporting the United Nations Charter and really working for peace? The 53 members of the United Nations who are supporting the Republic of Korea. Is the Soviet Union one of the 53? No.
No, not the Soviet Union, but the 53 of the 59 members of the United Nations which are sharing in the United Nations action in Korea. These are the nations united for peace, who have used the peaceful methods of mediation in 5 years of United Nations progress, and the nations who, now and forever, stand ready to meet and halt aggression anywhere with all the powers vested in them by the United Nations Charter.